Several days later, the night garden had largely repaired itself. There were still marks left on the weathered surface of its hull, but they did not affect its overall durability. Sunny was feeling better, as well, and the soldiers had received a much-needed reprieve from the draining intensity of the perilous voyage. Guided by the stars, the living ship resumed its journey. Sunny and Jet had both turned somber and taciturn, knowing that the Eternal City and the unknown dangers waiting for them there were drawing close now. Jet had entrusted the helm of the night garden to Ether and walked to the bow of the Titanic ship, looking at the distant horizon with a contemplative expression. Starlight infused the darkness with a pale silver radiance, and the cold breeze was blowing from the west, ruffling her raven-black hair. Her icy blue eyes seemed to glow with a chilling shine in the dark expanse of the quiet night. After a while, a black crow landed on her shoulder, waited for a few moments, and then pecked her on the cheek, as if to see if she was alive. Jet pushed the echo off with an irritated scowl. "This again? In your dreams, idiot." Pushed off her shoulder, Crow scrambled to take flight and flew up to land on a piece of the ship's rigging a few meters away. There, it opened its wings and stared at her with righteous indignation. "Corpse! Corpse!" It jumped up and down a couple of times, as if wanting to express a complaint. "Food! Food!" Jet gave it an unamused glance. "Not this corpse." Then, looking at it darkly, she added in a husky voice, "Bird. Soup." Crow stared at her silently for a few moments, then folded its wings and took a few hurried hops away, just to be safe. A pale smile appeared on Jet's lips. Not long after that, Sunny emerged from her shadow and leaned on the railing, giving Crow a curious glance. "I've always meant to ask, that echo of yours, it's unusually animated, isn't it?" Jet remained silent for a bit, then turned to him and shrugged. "I guess." She called Crow over and ruffled its feathers. It was a gift from the old man. "So, Crow is a bit special." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "The old man? Wake of Ruin?" Jet nodded absent-mindedly, then glanced at him with a wry smile. "Why? Is that so surprising?" Sunny scratched the back of his head, not sure how to answer. Wake of Ruin was a cantankerous old man, and his personality left a lot to be desired. It was hard to imagine him giving gifts to his subordinates, even if there seemed to be a complicated relationship between him and Jet. "No, it's just, he doesn't strike me as a generous man." Jet grinned. "You're an astute judge of character, Sunny." Sunny remained silent for a while, remembering the bits and pieces of what he knew about Jet's past. The kind of advice she gave him in his youth spoke volumes about what her own experiences had been, but Jet never mentioned the details directly. Eventually, he asked with a hint of caution in her voice, "Your work for the government, it has not always been entirely voluntary, has it?" Jet lingered for a few moments, then offered him a noncommittal shrug. "Well, as far as relationships go, that one used to be a bit toxic at times." She sighed and glanced at the dark expanse of undulating water in front of him. "But you are wrong if you think that it was not voluntary. It is true that after discovering my flaw, they put a leash around my neck and exploited me, but I chose to be exploited myself. I needed to kill in order to survive, and I knew that the government would provide me with plenty of prey. So I was using them, as well. It was a mutual relationship, no matter how toxic." Jet fell silent for a bit and then shuddered faintly. "Gods know it was way better than what would have happened to me in a legacy clan. That, I don't even want to think about." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "What about going independent?" Jet glanced at him with a faint smile. "You must have always been strong, Lord of Shadows." "Most awakened can't survive in the dream realm alone. I certainly couldn't, especially considering the demands of my flaw. I haven't always been the Soul Reaper, after all. I was quite weak and unremarkable, out there in the beginning." She looked away and let out a sigh. "But even if I could have, I am glad that I didn't. Left to my own devices, I would have rapidly gone feral." And then, I would have truly become a walking corpse, slowly rotting away while not caring about anything except satisfying my base desires until there was nothing left of me except for an unfeeling, murderous husk. Jet shook her head. People like us tend to value independence, Sunny, but there has to be something in our lives larger than us. It is fine to live an unremarkable life, but it all falls apart when power is added to the equation. We did not choose to wield power, but it was thrust upon us nonetheless, not that we would have refused it if we could. No one who had tasted true weakness would ever refuse power, after all. She turned and looked at him, her usual laid-back smile long gone. But power corrupts, Sunny. Its corruption is no less insidious than the corruption of the void, so one needs something greater than themselves to stave it off, just like Neff and her domain stave off corruption from the millions of mundane humans living in the dream realm. It can be principles, conviction, duty, devotion, or faith, anything that keeps you going even when all you want to do is fall down, and reminds you where you were heading in the first place. Jet studied him somberly, then suddenly gave him an easy smile and looked away. Personally, I sort of stumbled on what keeps me going by accident. I joined the government out of necessity, developed a misguided sense of professional pride, and only then found meaning in what I do. So, despite all the ugly things that happened along the way, I consider myself lucky. Oh, and it wasn't all bad. There were nice moments, too, really, if you think about it, I am nothing short of blessed. Sunny remained silent for a long while, looking at her with a subdued expression. Then, inhaling deeply, he asked, "So, no regrets?" Jet chuckled. "Life is too short for regret. Plus, look at me." She smiled faintly. Wielding fearsome power, ruling a gorgeous city, enjoying the respect and adoration of many people, and living in a fancy palace with a private garden. Who would have thought that a dull, timid girl from the outskirts whom no one cared about would end up that way? For a dead woman, I did pretty well for myself. Don't you think? Sunny smiled. Yes, pretty well, I'd say. He lingered for a bit, the smile slowly draining from his face. So, let me ask you a question. Jet gave him a curious look. Sure, go ahead. Follow current novels on n0velfire.net. Sunny considered his words for a while. He wanted to ask Jet the same thing he had asked Effie and Kai, whether she would discard personal freedom in pursuit of something that demanded complete submission, whether she would surrender herself completely to something that left her no choice but utter devotion. But now, he realized that there was no point in answering. Because Jet had already answered. Her answer remained the same as it had been all those years ago, remaining as firm as her quiet, unassuming determination. Sunny sighed. Well, that place where you are heading to. What does it look like? Jet laughed. Oh, that old thing? She paused for a few moments. Why, it's a world where people can live in peace and prosperity. A world where everyone is afforded the dignity they deserve and doesn't have to suffer bloodshed and strife. A gentle world, a place where kindness trumps cruelty. Saying that, Jet looked away and smiled wistfully. Funnily enough, it is also a place where someone like me can never exist. Isn't that ironic? There is no space for me in the world I am building. So, in a way, that makes me the architect of my own destruction. Sunny remained silent, not knowing how to answer. Perhaps there was no need to answer, to begin with. They stayed quiet side by side as the night garden sailed across the waves, drawing closer and closer to the mysterious places, the path to which was written in the stars. Where untold horrors and terrifying creatures were waiting for them, ready to tear them apart. The stars shone softly, illuminating their thorny path. Carried by invisible winds, the night garden could reach truly astonishing speed. Still, it took the living ship 2 more days to reach the area pointed out by the stars, a measure of time largely meaningless in the storm sea, where the movement of celestial bodies was odd and unpredictable, but was still used by humans both out of habit and out of necessity. Most of that time had been spent battling a calamitous storm, but at the end of the second day, the winds died down, and the unbridled fury of the storm sea was replaced by an eerie calm. Instead of the blinding radiance of cascading bolts of lightning and an unceasing torrent of rain, wisps of fog drifted above the endless expanse of rolling waves. The stars revealed themselves from behind the cloud just long enough to give the Saints of Night an opportunity to confirm that the night garden had reached its destination, and were then quickly swallowed by a veil of mist. The world brightened, leaving the cold embrace of darkness in favor of the pale ambivalence of twilight. Not needing the star map anymore, Sunny deactivated the enchantment that had revealed it to the world. The night garden might not have been the first to reach the destination, but that way, it would be the last. The living ship slowed down, drifting cautiously through the mist. Nobody knew what to expect from this place, so both the soldiers and their commanders were tense, staring into the gray vastness of the misty sea with apprehension. Sounds traveled far in the fog, so the measured murmur of waves splashing against the hull of the night garden could be heard even from the great height of its deck. Well, this has gone better than I expected. Jet and Sunny were at the observation deck at the bow of the Titanic ship. No different from the soldiers, they stared into the mist, trying to determine what was awaiting them ahead. The Eternal City was supposed to be here, somewhere, but the map was not exactly rich with detail about what it looked like, and what obstacles approaching it posed. Of course, they were not merely looking. Sunny had cast his shadow sense far and wide, enveloping a vast swath of the storm sea in a net of his perception. Jet, meanwhile, had sent Crow to scout ahead and report its findings to her. Feeling a little disturbed by what he sensed, Sunny raised an eyebrow. Better than expected? How do you mean? She shrugged with an easy smile. I mean that we reached the destination without suffering catastrophic damage or grievous casualties. The worst that has happened is being beset by a dozen or so of chillingly powerful abominations and an unimaginable horror or two. Smooth sailing, really. Sunny gave her a dubious look, then said in a slightly offended tone, "You had really low expectations for the feasibility of this expedition, it seems." Jet grinned. Having low expectations is the secret of living life free of disappointment, after all. She lingered for a few moments, then inhaled deeply and furrowed her brow. What is that smell? The water was far below them, but underestimating the senses of a saint was never a good idea. Sunny still gave Jet a surprised look. You can smell it? He looked down somberly. It's blood. Novelfire.net. Jet could not see it because of the mist, but actually, this entire area of the storm sea had turned a vivid shade of red, having been contaminated by an unimaginable amount of blood. Sunny could not discern its color either, but he could sense other things. The night garden drifted forward, sailing on a sea of blood. It wasn't simply moving through the red waves, though the hull of the living ship was absorbing the blood, subtly clearing the water around it. From time to time, a mangled chunk of flesh would brush against its bow, and be consumed, as well. It was quite an eerie scene, to say the least. Sunny sighed. This whole area is drowned in blood and littered with Tom corpses, pieces of Tom corpses, at least. I think your decision to arrive late was wise. It seems like a terrible battle concluded here just recently. The nightmare creatures who were still in the race must have clashed for the chance to reach the Eternal City. There was old Tom and the Dutchman, but there must have been many more abominations whom the night garden had never encountered. The storm sea was vast, after all, and not every contender had been following the stars from its eastern reaches. The weaker of the dreadful fiends would have perished on the way, but the strongest and truly harrowing ones would have all made it here. And then, they would have eradicated each other, with the most awful one emerging as victor. Sunny hummed. Maybe we should find mysterious star maps more often. Then, the nightmare creatures would do us a favor and all kill each other. It wasn't half bad to have some of the greatest threats in the storm sea reduce their own population so thoroughly. That said, the being who had slaughtered all these ancient horrors and came out on top was still out here, somewhere, already approaching the Eternal City. Sunny would have to face it there, so his satisfaction was overshadowed by dark anticipation. As if to illustrate his description, a dark shape suddenly revealed itself from the mist. It was as wide as a small island, protruding a few hundred meters above the waves, so it seemed small and insignificant in front of the towering wall of the night garden's hull. It was a chunk of flesh torn from the body of some enormous monstrosity. As the living ship drew closer, it dwarfed the hideous island of mangled flesh even more, then effortlessly pushed it aside. Sunny sighed. All this meat, going to waste. Jet gave him a strange look, then rolled her eyes. Nothing is stopping you from diving down to salvage it, you know. Sunny shivered. No thanks. Why would I? I don't even need to eat, actually. She looked away with a faint smile. For a while, there was nothing but silence between them. Tendrils of mist moved slowly across the deck of the night garden, and countless lanterns illuminating it shone like islands of warm light in the cold expanse of twilight vastness. Some time later, Sunny frowned. Noticing his somber expression, Jet raised her scythe a little. What is it? He lingered for a few moments, then grimaced. Nothing. That's the thing, I sense nothing. There is no sign of the Eternal City anywhere around us, for at least 100 kilometers in every direction. There were no signs of anything that could lead them to it, either, like a stele with runes carved into it or ancient gates that opened a portal to some unknown location. Considering that the Eternal City could not be reached by usual means, Sunny would not be surprised to encounter something like that. But there was nothing except for the vast expanse of the bloody sea, the mist, and the morbid remnants of the terrible battle that had happened here. Not long after, Crow returned from its patrol and landed on Jet's shoulder, cawing loudly, "Crow! Back!" She winced and tilted her head, moving her ear away from the small bird's black beak. Yes. Good job. Did you find something in the mist, yes or no? Crow stared at her for a few moments, then fluttered its wings proudly. No. Jet let out an exasperated sigh. After remaining silent for a short while, she asked in an uncertain tone, that map wouldn't have led us to nothing at all, would it? Sunny shook his head. Definitely not. Everything Weaver did had a reason, plus, whoever won the battle is nowhere to be seen. They would have hung around if there had been no path to the Eternal City here, searching. The fact that they are not here suggests that there is a path after all. I think. Jet sighed. Well, let's continue exploring. The night garden continued to drift through the fog, but even after several hours, Sunny could not sense anything in the vast area around them. In situations like this one, it was usually best not to hurry. They could slowly explore this region of the storm sea in search of clues, spending days or even weeks to accomplish the task. However, Sunny was pressed for time. Time was not standing still in the rest of the world, after all, and things that demanded his attention were slowly accumulating. Plus, they had competition. The monster who had triumphed in the dreadful battle was already ahead of them in the race, nearing the finish line or already there, so Sunny could not wait that long. Luckily or unfortunately, he had a way to save them quite a bit of time. Grimacing, Sunny summoned Weaver's mask and said as it settled on his face, "Oh, I am looking forward to this so much." The last time Sunny had used "Where is my eye?" enchantment of Weaver's mask, his own eyes were burned, rendering him blind. In fact, his vision recovered fully only just recently, so, naturally, he did not want to lose it again on the eve of a perilous battle. However, there was a learning curve to everything. The fact that he had been seriously harmed the first time around did not mean that he would suffer just as badly now. Back then, Sunny had not known what touching the strings of fate implied, so he treated them carelessly. He believed that things would be different now. If he held himself back, the damage he sustained would probably be significantly reduced. Granted, he would learn much less as a result, as well, catching maybe only a glimpse or two. And even if his expectation was proven wrong, he would still be able to fight quite well by relying on shadow sense. The danger of witnessing something he was not supposed to see still remained, though. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. With a sigh, Sunny gave Jet a poignant stare. Would he end up on the floor again? No, but seriously, what is it with Jet and slapping me back to my senses? That was how their relationship started, and even all these years later, things were still the same. Knowing that there was no point in stalling, Sunny activated "Where is my eye?" Once again, the inconceivable vastness of the Tom tapestry of fate revealed itself to him. And once again, he was completely overwhelmed by it. This time, however, his experience helped him shut most of it out faster. Following the steps he had taken before, Sunny limited the scope of his perception to only one tiny fraction of the unfathomable infinity of endless threads, concentrating only on those of them that had to do with this area of the storm sea. He had an easier time searching for a thread having to do with the Eternal City because he knew that the night garden was connected to it, had been built there, even. So, the string of fate he was searching for would pass through the living ship, as well. It did not take him long to discover a worthy candidate. Not too far from him, a strange thread extended from the sky into the sea, piercing the deck of the night garden. There was an odd duality to it, with the upper reaches of it being woven out of silver starlight, while the lower were woven out of impenetrable darkness. Reaching for the unusual string of fate, Sunny brushed his fingers against it. This time, he was careful to only touch for a brief moment and instantly pull away. That way, he hoped, the truth revealed to him would be modest in scope, and therefore, his eyes and his mind would be spared most of the damage. His hope turned out not to be unfounded. But before Sunny confirmed it, he was assaulted by an astonishing vision. What the hell is this? He was horrified for a moment, because what met him was a boundless, dark void. However, thankfully enough, it was not the void. It was merely a void. An infinite, silent, empty expanse of vacuous darkness where nothing existed, no life, no warmth, not even air. Only deadly rays of cosmic radiation and invisible blossoms of gravity fields. And in that darkness, countless stars burned with beautiful silver light. Sunny was stunned. Holy hell! I'm in space. Indeed, this was the great vacuum of space. But at that moment, he realized something else, as well. That this was also the black skies, the true realm of the goddess of night. And there, among the stars, a beautiful city with tall silver spires bathed in the starlight. Sunny pulled his hand away, and the vision of the Eternal City vanished from his straining mind. So it's in space? Sunny remained motionless for what felt like an eternity, but only lasted a brief moment. No, that did not make sense, as much as everything never made sense in the dream realm. Nightwalker had managed to board the night garden and sail away from the Eternal City, and at the moment, the night garden could not fly, let alone travel between stars. Sunny hesitated for a while, then tentatively touched the string of fate once more. He saw the Eternal City once again. Only, this time, it was in a state of chaos. The source of this content is novelfire.net. It was under attack. A vast presence moved in the darkness beyond the city. Its form and shape were impossible to discern, since it was indistinguishable from the darkness of space. Perhaps it was the darkness itself, and the only way to perceive its existence was by watching the vast swathes of stars be obscured by its passing. The presence was horrifying, unfathomable, and full of cold, indifferent, obliterating intent. Wherever her pale gaze fell, the immortal denizens of the Eternal City were unmade. The silver spires melted and fell, and the very fabric of the celestial abode was consumed by entropy. But then, the city rose from the dust. Its fabric was mended, the spires coalesced from incandescent pools of liquid matter, and the living beings were restored to their pristine youthfulness. Only to be destroyed again. A million cycles of death and restoration passed in the blink of an eye. It was an eternity of devastation. The immortals screamed in terror as they died, and wept in horror as they were mercilessly brought back to life. Moments flowed into seconds, and seconds flowed into minutes. Minutes turned into hours, and hours turned into days. Days. Sunny pulled his hand away and staggered, horrified. What did I just see? Trembling, he imagined the dreadful scene once more. Slowly, hesitantly, he realized what he had witnessed. It was a battle. It had been a battle between Storm God and the Demon of Repose. Then, there was only one thing he needed to learn. Drawing in a shaky breath, Sunny extended his hand toward the string of fate once more. He saw how the Eternal City fell. Sunny dismissed Weave's mask and stared into the mist with a hollow look on his face. Jet, who was standing nearby with a raised hand, lowered it slowly. Huh? Your eyes are not cooked. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, then turned to her, the golden glow slowly disappearing from the deep darkness of his dilated pupils. Eventually, he grimaced. Still hurts like hell, though. His eyes had not turned into embers, this time, but the last image he had seen did end up burned into them, so his vision was a bit blurry. It was going to pass swiftly, though, so he did not mind that much. Jet studied him, then asked in a neutral tone, well? Did you divine any clues? Sunny could not understand what she meant, then realized that she considered his mysterious ability a form of divination. Which, it was, in a sense. He nodded slowly. Yes. It fell into the sea. Jet blinked a few times. What fell into the sea? Sunny just stared at her. The Eternal City. It fell into the sea. Turning around, he raised a hand and pointed at the sky. Well, he pointed into the mist, but his intention was to point at the sky. It entered the atmosphere, burning like a falling sun, glided majestically down to the horizon, and hit the water like an enormous asteroid. That thing was the size of NQSC, too, so the explosion its impact caused, well, I guess it was in the same weight category as when Nephi's detonated 6 of her cores in Godgrave. Catastrophic on a global scale. That latter happened below ground, however, while the former had happened in the middle of a damn sea. He inhaled deeply. Needless to say, the entire city was vaporized. But the demon of repose did not care, I guess, because it still restored itself to flawless condition, complete with all the immortals populating it. And then, it drowned. Sunny looked down, at the wooden deck beneath them. So, the map is pointing to the right spot. It's just that it doesn't have a vertical axis. We are in the right place, but, way above our destination. Jet scratched the tip of his nose. How did Nightwalker manage to sail away on the Night Garden, then? Sunny smiled darkly. I have no idea. Why are you asking me? Go ask Nightwalker. He remained silent for a while, then sighed. Perhaps the Night Garden was at the bottom of the sea, as well. Actually, it is good news for us. Jet raised an eyebrow. It is? Sunny nodded. It is a fact that the Eternal City is at the bottom of the Storm Sea, and it is also a fact that Nightwalker used the Night Garden to escape the Eternal City and sail to the safer waters near the coast. Which proves my theory that this ship is not just a ship, it can also be a submarine. He lingered for a moment, and then smiled in bewilderment. It can also be a spaceship, actually. We're on a spaceship, Jet. She gave him a suspicious look. That's cool. However, don't think I don't know why you're saying that. Sunny looked at her with an oblivious look. Huh? Whatever do you mean? She smiled dangerously. You said it to distract me from the fact that you want to sink my ship, didn't you? You want to try submerging the Night Garden and diving to the bottom of the sea. Sunny let out a chuckle, as if amazed by the preposterous nature of that remark. Then, he added in a small tone, yes? Jet let out a long sigh. I'll give you that we can probably submerge the Night Garden by flooding the freshwater reservoir. However, your theory about the Aegis holding the water at bay is questionable at best, and completely unfounded at worst. And since we can hardly test it without causing severe damage to the surface infrastructure of the city, it's a no. Sunny, who was secretly reeling from catching a small glimpse of the dreadful battle between a god and a demon, smiled weakly. Who says that we can't test it? The source of this content is novelfire.net. He commanded the shadows to rise, manifesting them into a miniature model of the Night Garden. Then, he built a translucent dome above its deck, and another one a little smaller, and completely black, below it. I don't think I ever tried manifesting shadows on that scale, but I am certain that I can cover all of the Night Garden with an airtight dome. We will submerge the ship until its masts are underwater and see if the Aegis prevents the water from reaching that dome. It does, we can descend further. If it doesn't, we simply surface again, send the night garden back to the coast, and venture to the bottom of the storm sea by our lonesome, you and I. Jet still had a dubious expression on her face. Why are you so keen on taking the night garden to the Eternal City? Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then sighed. Because the dream spawn is on the moon. Jet raised an eyebrow. So who? She fell silent for a moment, then gave him a calculating look. You're hoping that if we restore the night garden to its former glory, we will be able to attack that man before he attacks us? Sunny lingered for a while. It is one of the reasons, yes. I might not seem like it, but I am actually quite nervous about that guy. Don't get me wrong, I am not worried that he'll be able to defeat me and Nephi's. However, I am almost entirely certain that if he brings the fight to either the waking world or the dream realm, there will be a lot of collateral damage, a lot of it. If we take the fight to him, though, there are no civilians on the moon. Jet studied him for a bit. Eventually, she grimaced and looked away. We can try flooding the reservoir. However, we will only continue the descent after making sure that the citizens of the night garden are completely safe, and that we can summon Nef's dream gate underwater to retreat at the first sign of overwhelming danger. Sunny simply gave her a nod. Naturally. Then, glancing into the mist, he hesitated for a few seconds and asked, "What's on the bottom of the storm sea, anyway?" Jet turned around and started walking away, a troubled expression on her face. Her answer did not make him any less apprehensive. Nobody knows. Because nobody has ever reached the bottom of the storm sea. If we do, we will be the first humans to learn. The night garden slowly sank into a sea of blood. The deck had been cleared by then, with all the soldiers joining the civilians in the city below. The runic hall was cleared of all non-essential personnel, with only the Saints of Night keeping Jet and Sunny company. The enchanted circle shimmered faintly as Jet deepened her connection to the living ship, drawing more and more water into the vast reservoir at the lowest layer of its vertical structure. The trees growing in the parks and groves on the main deck of the night garden swayed, and the water in the lakes rippled. Far below, the waves foamed as the titanic ship slowly began to submerge. Sunny observed the process from the great height of the runic hall for a while, then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. As the ship submerged, the deep shadows populating its main deck stirred, growing deeper and darker. Then, they started to flow upward all across its outer perimeter, climbing higher and higher into the air. Jet and the Saints of Night observed the process with guarded expressions, their eyes widening slightly. It was an incredible sight, indeed. The night garden was more than a dozen kilometers in length, and at the moment, darkness rose all across its vast expanse like streams of ink flowing up the surface of an invisible glass dome. Sunny frowned, concentrating. Soon enough, the streams of darkness fused and climbed higher than the roof of the towering pagoda where the runic hall, the bridge of the night garden, was located. The dome of shadows closed, obscuring the twilight of the outside world. It was as if the living ship was hidden in a great cavern, the warm glow of its lanterns illuminating the echoing darkness. The shadows hardened, turning into black obsidian. I wonder. SS_Novel_Fire. Ned Sunny found himself wondering if, maybe, the Shadow Realm itself had been created in a similar fashion only on a much, much greater scale. Jet let out a quiet sigh. Damn. No matter how many times I witness a sovereign unleashing their power, it never gets any less humbling. Sunny looked at her, suddenly curious about what Jet's own supreme power would be. He remained silent for a few moments, then turned away. We are not called demigods without a reason. Attaining supremacy means crossing the threshold between what is mundane and what is divine, so while we are not deities yet, we have a foot in the door. He lingered a little before adding in a more grim tone, it is the next step that is truly vexing. Because to take it, one has to discard what little mundane and therefore human is left of them. As his words echoed in the darkness, the night garden continued to sink. Soon enough, half of its immense mass was already underwater, and the main deck grew much closer to the surface of the sea. Jet glanced at the Saints of Night, then addressed Neve in a calm tone, "Neve, please check how things are going below deck." The citizens of the night garden knew what was happening. Some had been apprehensive, but most seemed excited about the thrilling new development. Diving into a bottomless ocean full of eldritch abominations. Wasn't that an exciting change of scenery? Perhaps spending time on the indestructible living ship had made them feel too safe, but the denizens of the wandering city were quite a carefree bunch as far as Sunny was concerned. They rarely showed the level of fear and anxiety one would expect from people living in the perilous waters of the storm sea. But then again, Sunny could somewhat understand the strangeness of their mentality. After all, most humans were tied to their homes, and therefore to their cities. If danger arrived, they ultimately had no choice but to face it or succumb to it, since escaping was usually not an option. What would a citizen of NQSC do if some unholy abomination descended upon the city? Escaping into the wilderness was hardly an option, since it would mean dying of starvation, contaminated water, poisonous air, or simply the elements. Similarly, nothing but death awaited those who would want to flee Bastion or Ravenheart. But what if their city itself could come around and flee from danger, taking them with it? That, Sunny thought, was a fundamentally less stressful way of life. So, he mentally patted himself on the shoulder for procuring himself a wonderful moving castle. Good job. Come to think of it, once Sunny became sacred, Mimic would probably be able to come into something of a similar size to Night Garden. And while it did not possess many of the wondrous abilities that the living ship did, it had its own marvelous qualities. I should feed it well. In any case, many of the passengers of the Night Garden gathered in the sorceress observation halls below the deck to watch the ship submerge instead of hiding in their homes and praying to the dead gods. They could not see what was happening on the main deck, and the mist obscured most of the world, but still, once the surface of the sea drew close, they saw red waves breaking against the weathered hull of the living ship. And then, they were below the water. Moment of truth. The Night Garden finally submerged enough for the waves to wash over its main deck. Of course, the Dome of Shadows was protecting it at the moment, but depending on how the situation developed, Sunny would either ride the Night Garden comfortably into the depths or would be forced to dive into the abyssal darkness himself, protected by nothing except the onyx serpent shell. It's a pity I didn't kill old Tom. Summoning its shade would have been quite useful, considering the circumstances. While Sunny shivered at the memory of the gargantuan horror of the depths, the Night Garden fell deeper into the water. Finally, the waves closed above the Shadow Dome, and the tip of the main mast disappeared below the surface of the sea. For a while, tense silence reigned in the runic hall. Eventually, Jet asked in a hushed tone, "Well?" Sunny smiled. Bone dry. The Shadow Dome had been built to be just a little bit smaller than the invisible aegis protecting the main deck of the Night Garden. So, if that mysterious barrier was not capable of holding water at bay, the water would have washed over the manifested shadows. However, not even a single drop touched the surface of the dome. Which meant that Sunny had been right, the aegis was indeed capable of allowing the Night Garden to dive into the sea. Jet let out a quiet sigh. She remained silent for a while, and then said in a neutral tone, "I guess that means that we are diving into the abyss." The Night Garden continued to descend into the cold waters of the storm sea. Sunny had allowed the Dome of Shadows to collapse into a torrent of flowing darkness and vanish, thus allowing Jet and the Saints of Night to see what was happening around the Titanic ship. It was a wondrous sight. There did not seem to be anything standing in the way of water, and yet it failed to wash over the decks of the Night Garden, as if pushed away by an invisible barrier. Strangely enough, that made Sunny feel like he was a colossal aquarium. Of course, an aquarium was supposed to keep aquatic shapes of life alive on dry land, not the other way around. What is the opposite of an aquarium, though? A terrarium. It was probably a terrarium. His odd thoughts were interrupted by Jet, who glanced around with a wary expression on her face and said, "We will proceed slowly. Be ready to summon that dome back if the aegis begins leaking." Their initial success did not guarantee safety. After all, there could be a limit to what the invisible barrier isolating the surface decks of the Night Garden from hostile environments could do. Beyond that, they did not only have water to worry about, there was also pressure, oxygen, and a dozen other things that had to be accounted for in order to ensure the safety of all passengers. Personally, Sunny was sure that the Demon of Repose would have built and enchanted her ship properly, but he was all for taking all the necessary precautions. After all, demons were different from people. Who knew if they had even needed to breathe or cared about not the weight of an entire ocean resting on their shoulders? So, there was no harm in keeping a close eye on things. Soon, Ether and Bloodwave departed to perform various checks, leaving Sunny and Jet alone on the bridge. They watched the water flow upward past the night garden in silence, both secretly haunted by the memories of the tomb of Ariel. The sea around them was red, but the deeper the night garden descended, the paler its morbid hue became. Less and less light could penetrate the great mass of water, as well, so their surroundings were growing dimmer. The grotesque remains of slain nightmare creatures drifted past them from time to time, sinking at their own speed. After a while, the living ship was surrounded by utter darkness, shining with myriad lights in its embrace. The lanterns illuminating the night garden were the only source of light in the cold abyss, so, surrounded by their vibrant glow, it fell into the dark depths like a radiant nebula. The only sounds in the dead silence of the deep sea were the quiet rustle of leaves and the soft whispers of wind that blew between the masts of the Titanic ship. Jet sighed lightly. At least there's wind. That is a good sign. The presence of wind indicated that the night garden was producing its own oxygen, probably absorbing it from the surrounding water. The carbon dioxide generated by millions of people breathing in its depths was probably being absorbed by the trees growing on the main deck. Which didn't really make sense, considering that there was no sun here. However, the living ship was known to have a mystical effect on all flora growing aboard it, so Sunny would not be surprised to learn that the groves on the surface decks of the night garden could thrive even in these conditions. He himself had a tree that thrived in the darkness of the forgotten shore, after all, out there in the courtyard of the nameless temple. In any case, checking to see if the air was not growing stale was one of the tasks Ether and Bloodwave were going to perform. Neve, meanwhile, was busy monitoring the situation on the lower decks and in the cavernous holds of the living ship, where the passengers were hidden. Everything seemed to be going fine, at least for now. So, Sunny allowed himself to relax, but only a little. Both he and Jet were still tense, keeping themselves in a state of battle readiness. After all, they did not know what problems the night garden could experience while descending into the dark depths of the storm sea after decades of only sailing on its surface. On top of that, there were external threats they could encounter, as well, and the nature of their environment dictated an entirely different approach to battle, one that was inherently disadvantageous for land predators like them. Follow current novels on novelfire.net. Even if the descent proceeded without any accidents, though, what awaited them in the abyssal depths was the Eternal City, all the horrors populating it, and the unknown calamity that had slaughtered all the other nightmare creatures in the waters above them. How exciting! Time passed slowly. But even after a long while, nothing seemed to happen. The darkness of the surrounding waters had grown even more absolute. Then, it grew eerie and frightening. Jet glanced around with a total lack of amusement on her pale face and leaned on her scythe, seemingly seeking comfort in the cold steel of its ghostly blade. "Ah, I don't like this at all." Sunny, however, was not inclined to agree. "I am quite happy, though." She looked at him and raised an eyebrow. He nodded to the eerie darkness outside the shimmering sphere of light produced by the night garden. "I think we have more or less reached the depth where I gave up on pursuing old Tom. The pressure was giving trouble to Neve and Bloodwave back then, but do you feel anything now?" "No. The hull may be creaking a little, but it seems like the night garden is protecting its passengers from the weight of the sea, too." Jet smiled faintly. "That's true." Sunny lingered for a few seconds. "Have you been to the Chained Isles before the war?" Jet tilted her head a little. "Not really." "Why?" He shrugged. "It's just that diving this deep felt like experiencing the crushing all over again. Not the most pleasant experience. Of course, on the Chained Isles, enormous chains prevented islands from rising too high, so he had only ever suffered the most harmless extent of the crushing. Its full wrath was far more devastating, capable of obliterating even the most powerful abominations. The master of the Ivory Island wielded the crushing as a component now. If used as a weapon, it could decimate entire regions. If used as a shield, it could prevent even a god from reaching the heavenly island unscathed. Sunny wanted to comment on how the pressure of the abyssal depths was similar to that, but then fell silent abruptly. Out there, in the darkness beyond the light of the night garden, a colossal tentacle slowly drifted in the cold void, moving past the descending ship in the distance. It was oddly limp and still. Noticing his expression, Jet frowned. "What's the matter?" Sunny peered into the darkness for a while, silent. Eventually, he responded in a quiet tone, "I think it's old Tom. It seems to be dead."